Hello everyone, Earl Henderson, Primordial Defense. Thank you for watching. I have another Monday quarterback video for you. I'm going to play the entirety of this video without any interruption, and then I'll go back and talk about things that are going on to better explain what's going on, and talk about things that I think that were done right and or done wrong. Without further ado, here we go.
Hello, my name is Jeff Halleck, Undersheriff of the Orange County Sheriff's Department. This critical incident video is intended to provide you with information about a deputy-involved shooting involving the Orange County Sheriff's Department. A deputy-involved shooting demands the highest level of scrutiny and rightfully is a matter of public concern. In this critical incident video, we will provide a synopsis, including relevant video and audio, so you have a better understanding of what occurred during this incident. The investigation related to this incident is ongoing and could take up to 1 year to complete. With that in mind, our understanding of the incident may change as additional evidence is collected, analyzed, processed, and reviewed. Additionally, we withhold judgment and do not draw any conclusions about whether or not our deputies acted in a manner consistent with our policies and in accordance with the law until all facts are known and the investigations are complete.
I am Sergeant Dennis Breckner with the Orange County Sheriff's Department Public Affairs Division. I will provide you with a brief overview of the deputy-involved shooting that occurred on September 23, 2020 in the city of San Clemente, California. On Wednesday, September 23, 2020, at approximately 1:30 p.m., two deputies assigned to the Homeless Outreach Team on patrol in the city of San Clemente observed a man who appeared to be jaywalking near El Camino Real, a busy four-lane street, and Avenida San Gabriel. The first video is from the patrol video system camera located inside the deputy's vehicle. When the deputies first arrive, they approach a man and attempt to talk with him. The man walks behind the patrol vehicle and re-enters the street. The deputies are directing the man back to the sidewalk and he refuses to follow their commands. Due to the direction of the patrol vehicle, you will not see the deputies or the man during the confrontation. The audio is from microphones attached to the deputies' uniforms. But as they move away from the vehicle, the audio becomes unintelligible.
Okie doke. He's seen you. He's seen you, copper. Go back behind that. Okie doke. There he is. What is he? Want to go get a joint? You want to go buy a joint? We'll show you later. Like this is the jaywalk. You need to have a control. There we go. You shit me, dude. It's control, man. I don't know. It is. It's like guy just stopped in the middle. We'll make case law. Gabriel. Not your stop. We're going to identify him, huh? We're getting quite close. Ready? How you doing? How you doing? Hey, you need to stop.
That's easy on San Gabriel. Because you're
The next video you will see is from the cell phone video provided by a witness at the scene. This portion of the video starts after the deputies attempt to contact the man.
What intersection? I've been on this side of the street from this west, from that place. Liquor store right there. When did I take one? Stop touching. Stop touching. Stop touching. I'm eating. Why you stopping? What's he doing, bro? Stop touching. Stop touching. Stop touching, bro. What is your problem? Why you touching me? Why you touching me? Why you touching me? For what? Who are you? Really? Stop touching. Stop touching. Don't you see yourself? Do you see yourself? Do you see yourself? What? Eating? Where? Arrested what? Where? Show me where. Put it up there. Where? After the liquor store? After the liquor store, I came across the damn street right here. They want me here.
The man is refusing to obey the deputy's commands to go back to the sidewalk and is actively resisting the deputy's attempt to detain him. A use of force occurs as both deputies try to gain control of him. During the use of force, one deputy is heard on the witness cell phone video saying, "He's got my gun," multiple times. Shortly after, the deputy-involved shooting occurs. 2 shots are heard. Following the deputy-involved shooting, the deputies gain control of the man, assess his condition, and begin CPR. The man was later pronounced deceased at the scene.
Gotta get this on video. I got it. Yeah. Damn.
This incident was also captured on surveillance video from a nearby motel. The surveillance video is motion activated and did not capture the entirety of the incident. The surveillance video begins after the initial use of force as the deputies are attempting to gain control of the man. We will first show you the video as it was captured by the surveillance video. Then we will provide you a closer version of the surveillance video. Please note that this video does not have audio.
When a deputy-involved shooting occurs, 3 simultaneous investigations are immediately initiated. The Orange County District Attorney's Office conducts the primary investigation into the actions of the involved deputies to determine whether their actions were within the law. The Orange County Sheriff's Department Homicide Detail investigates the criminal conduct of any potential suspects prior to or during the incident. The third is an internal administrative investigation conducted by the Orange County Sheriff's Department to determine whether the actions of the involved deputies were within policy and consistent with our training and identify areas where improvement is needed. Additionally, the Office of Independent Review examines the Orange County Sheriff's Department investigations. The Orange County District Attorney's Office and Orange County Sheriff's Department will continue to investigate and analyze this incident to determine whether the actions of the involved deputies were both within the law and department policy. Thank you for taking the time to view this critical incident video.
Okay, let's get into it.
Hello, my name is Jeff Halleck, Undersheriff of
The liquor store, I came across the damn street right here. What's your problem? Why you touching me?
Okay, so this happened a little while ago. So this occurred in the year of 2020. So it's been a couple years. But the legal process, it takes a while. So it's not like it's unusual that there's been some kind of change in or update within the legal realm. And this is basically what's happening. They've decided to go ahead and release the video and release findings from the DA. And the investigation has taken this long, and they've are just basically doing an update in a sense. So, looking at an article from the Los Angeles Times. This was from February 11th, 2022. And they talk about the incident and how the officers are not going to be facing criminal charges according to District Attorney's Office. It talks about prosecutors on Friday released a 10-page letter, which I'll talk about here in a second, that outlined the investigation into the September 23rd, 2020 shooting. Talks about the incident, how they tried to detain him, how he resisted arrest, kept his grip on the officer's gun, etc. Now, it also goes into talking about a lawsuit filed in December 2020 on behalf of Reinhold's widow, LaToya, his mother, Judy Reinhold Tucker, and his children is ongoing. Attorneys for the family said Friday that their clients were disappointed but not surprised by prosecutors' decision, which they called a rubber stamp. The DA's office works hand in hand with deputies from the Sheriff's Department on a daily basis, and as such, the reviews of deputy shootings can hardly be considered independent, the attorneys, John Taylor and Neil Guillotte, said. We will march forward and obtain justice for the Reinhold family. Taylor and Gulawat said they were confident a jury will hold the deputies responsible for Reinhold's death. The prosecutor's letter, meanwhile, laid out more details of the events leading up to the shooting. The article goes on to describe, the events leading up, the events. Summarizing what's going on. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so they say this was a racially motivated stop aimed at harassing Mr. Reinhold, nothing more, the attorney said. The deputies' escalating tactics, including having a taser drawn and tackling Mr. Reinhold to the ground, directly contributed to the deputies' unlawful use of deadly force against a man who was unarmed and had not committed a crime. Of course, it goes on to talk about more of the incident, him grabbing the gun. So, in this report that I'm about to read, it mentions that there were several encounters and arrests by law enforcement. Of course, the family attorneys said that the inclusion of those incidents in the report screams of bias. There was no reason to include information about his convictionless past in this report except to malign Mr. Reinhold's character in a public forum. It has absolutely nothing to do with the DA's decision regarding criminal charges against the deputies involved. The article says, the shooting roiled the San Clemente community and left lingering questions. How did Reinhold, a well-educated, church-going father of two who coached youth soccer, end up living on the streets of South Orange County? What pushed him into mental illness and homelessness? The shooting echoed the 2015 killing of Charlie Africa Kunang, a black man who was mentally ill and homeless. He was shot to death by LAPD officers in broad daylight on Skid Row. Los Angeles County District Attorney declined to prosecute the two officers, saying the dead man had put his fingers around the weapon. Talks about that case. There was another article, and it's so hard sometimes to, maybe this one was it, from the OC Register. This was February 18th, 2021. There was family talking about his mental illness. And I wanted to quote that because I had something to say about it. And of course, in this article, the family saying that the deputies had no reason to stop him. And they're accusing the officers of creating and escalating the confrontation. The family also said that Mr. Reinhold wasn't in distress and didn't pose any danger to himself or anyone else. If he wasn't a black man, this stop never would have happened, let alone the shooting that takes his life. The family says that the image of Reinhold grabbing the deputy's weapon were misleading, and that he was flailing and incidentally near the weapon. They said Reinhold suffered from mental illness and would often stay in various parts of the state. They say he'd been in San Clemente for about 30 days before he was killed. The lawsuit asked for an unspecified amount of monetary damages. Both of these deputies have returned to duty following the shooting, but were reassigned. All right, so going into it, of course, the family wants to talk about mental illness. You know, they say that he suffered from mental illness. Well, why the fuck haven't you done anything for him? If you're his family, why is this guy homeless? Shouldn't he be in your home somewhere? Now that he's gotten involved in this situation where he has forced the police to have to use deadly physical force to protect themselves, and he's died as a result, now the family all of a sudden wants to come out and claim him as their family and act like they're all concerned. If they would have been all concerned to begin with, this dude wouldn't have been fucking homeless. He would have been living with one of them. So this is, in my opinion, a case of where the family wasn't really giving a shit all along, but now they see some money opportunity. Now they want to jump on this fucking bandwagon of mental illness and, oh, he was black, this is why they shot him, hoping they're going to get a fucking paycheck. This is fucking ghetto lottery as far as I'm concerned. His family has been knowing him since he was born. Or since they were born, if they're younger than him. If the family really, truly gave a shit about this guy, he wouldn't be homeless. He wouldn't be living in multiple different parts of the state. It is clear and evident to me that they didn't give a fuck about him. But now that he's dead, now they see this possible opportunity to get some money out of it. Now they all of a sudden care about him. I call bullshit on that. And of course I also call bullshit on him being shot simply because he was black. This bullshit fucking race card narrative, I wish this fucking bullshit would go away just like the COVID bullshit starting to go away. Everyone has finally, well, not everyone, but a lot of people have finally come to the point where they're like, you know what? Fuck this COVID shit. This shit's dumb. And it's not too far off where I believe that people are eventually going to get to the point where they're going to be like, all right, this bullshit race card stuff, accusing the police of them having to shoot people because they're black, is bullshit. And that's exactly what it is. It's bullshit. Police aren't going around shooting people just because of their skin color. That's ludicrous. The evidence is out there. For a while now, agencies have been utilizing body cameras. Now, not every agency has a body camera, but most do. And out of all these agencies that have body cameras that capture these events, there is not one incident that you can look at and say, well, this was just pure racism. That cop said you're going to die inward. No. Like that, there's not one video out there that you can look at and say that it was somehow racially motivated. All the videos that are out there, you see these people, and it's not just black people, it's white people too. But in these videos where the police are forced to have to use deadly physical force, that's it. They're forced into having to do it. The people are making them do it because they're armed with weapons and they're trying to take the police officers' weapons. And this is no different. This guy tried to take the officer's gun away from him. That's a deadly physical force situation right there. All right. Now, going into that 10-page report. So this 10-page report comes from the District Attorney of Orange County, California, Todd Spitzer. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Came out February 7th, 2022. He sends this to the sheriff involving the shooting, of course. Please accept this letter, blah, blah, blah. Overview. This letter contains a description of the scope and legal conclusions relating to the OCDA's investigation of the September 23rd, 2020 fatal officer-involved shooting of Kurt Andreas Reinhold. It just goes in that brief overview. It talks about investigative methodology, talking about how they got a hold of the case, blah, blah, blah. Factual summary. Okay. Deputy Eduardo Duran has worked for the OCSD since 2007. Since 2018, he has been assigned to the San Clemente substation as a patrol deputy, and for the past year has been working as Homeless Liaison Officer, HLO. Deputy Jonathan Israel had been working as an Orange County Sheriff's Deputy for the past 8 years. For the past year and a half, Deputy Israel has been working as a Homeless Liaison Officer for the Sheriff's Department. Talks about that in an attempt to better deal with the increased homeless population, the Sheriff's Office or Department has created an assignment of HLO. Both Deputy Israel and Deputy Duran had successfully completed Anaheim Police Department's 40-hour crisis intervention training. Included in this training at the Anaheim Police Department is a 60-minute session on dealing with the homeless population. At the Anaheim PD's training course presenters discuss the importance of trying to de-escalate situations with homeless people in the field, though these tactics include, but are not limited to, using non-threatening language, providing safe space between the officers and the homeless person, not using foul language, offering services, and having a single officer try and gain a rapport with the individual. Along with this training, OCSD has an 8-page policy manual on homeless outreach and liaison that deputies are required to view. The policy manual speaks to the primary goals that focus on outreach, not enforcing any law, criminalizing a homeless subject for illegal camping or loitering in public, offering services where they're available, and working relationships with individuals they repeatedly encounter. Date of officer-involved shooting on September 23, 2020, starting at approximately 12 p.m., Deputy Eduardo Duran and Deputy Jonathan Israel started working a 2-person patrol shift in the city of San Clemente. Both deputies wore OCSD-issued green uniforms with bulletproof vests and gun belts. The front of the vest has numerous pockets that contain a department-issued radio, mace canister, and other items. On the back of the vest, in large yellow letters, the word Sheriff. On the front of the vest, an embroidered OCSD Sheriff's badge is on the left chest area, as well as OCSD Sheriff's badges on both right and left shoulders. Prior to their patrolling the streets, Deputy Duran told Deputy Israel about his last few days of work and about an incident with a homeless person, later identified as Reinhold, on the night before at the Ole Hansen Pool Center off PCH in the city of San Clemente. On September 22nd, 2022, at approximately 9 p.m., Deputy Duran was at the Sheriff's Annex located in San Clemente City Hall when he observed video surveillance of Reinhold trespassing on the Old Hansen Pool Center property. After watching Reinhold on video, Deputy Duran drove to the Old Hansen location with fellow Deputy Mike Harris and Deputy Luis Perez. Deputy Mike Harris recognized the man, Reinhold, on the video surveillance as a person who had been in the city of San Clemente for approximately a month. The 3 deputies arrived to Old Hansen at approximately 10 p.m. When the deputies tried to engage Reinhold in conversation, he would not respond to their questions. When told that the owners of Old Hansen usually do not allow people permission to sleep there and asked him who gave him permission to sleep there, Reinhold's response was, "God told me I can be here." They proceeded to offer Mr. Reinhold services or any resources. Reinhold completely ignored the deputies. Realizing they did not have an active no trespassing letter from the owner, all the deputies concluded they had no enforceable action they could take. The entire incident took approximately 5 minutes. The next day, at 1:32 p.m. on September 23rd, deputies Israel and Duran were in their marked OCSD Ford Explorer driving southbound on El Camino Real. This location is part of the two deputies assigned area with San Clemente. Deputy Israel was the driver, and Deputy Duran was the front passenger seat, typing a report on his own board computer based upon prior service call earlier that day. While traveling southbound, Deputy Israel visually observed Reinhold traveling northbound on El Camino Real. Deputy Israel believed Reinhold was homeless based upon his appearance, proceeded to make a U-turn, and parked at a 7-Eleven lot on El Camino Real in the city of San Clemente. While sitting in the driver's seat of his patrol vehicle, Deputy Israel visually observed Reinhold walk across the street against a solid red hand signal in violation of Vehicle Code Section 21456C, walking against a red hand for pedestrian traffic. Upon seeing this violation, Deputy Israel activated his forward red light and drove the marked Ford Explorer southbound to contact Reinhold. Deputy Duran did not observe the actions of Reinhold as he was typing on his keyboard. As Deputy Israel was driving the patrol car, Deputy Duran told him, "Don't make case law." This comment was made by Deputy Duran because he personally did not see the actions of Reinhold and wanted to make sure Deputy Israel had probable cause to initiate a stop. Deputy Israel drove past Reinhold, and upon parking his Explorer southbound on El Camino Real, he and Deputy Duran exited the vehicle and told Reinhold, "Hey, stop." Reinhold ignored these commands and kept walking away from the deputies. Deputy Israel took the lead in attempting to contact Reinhold, and Deputy Duran acted as a backup. When Deputy Israel told Reinhold he was detained, Reinhold asked for what. Deputy Israel told Reinhold it was for jaywalking. Reinhold disagreed with the deputy and continued walking away from the deputy in violation of Penal Code Section 148A, willfully resisting, delaying, or obstructing a police officer in the discharging of his duties. Reinhold walked away from the deputies into the middle of the street in violation of Vehicle Code Section 21954A, pedestrian upon a roadway other than a marked crosswalk. Deputy Israel entered the street and attempted to direct traffic and direct Reinhold back to the sidewalk. At no point did either of the deputies raise their voice, swear, or attempt to instigate Reinhold. Keeping their voices controlled and trying to direct him out of the street were their attempts at de-escalation. While directing Reinhold back to the sidewalk with his arms, Reinhold slapped Deputy Israel's hand away in violation of Penal Code Section PC 243B, battery against a peace officer. Reinhold hit Deputy Israel's hand and arm 3 additional times during a period that lasted approximately 1 minute and 30 seconds. A civilian witness, John Doe number 1, who was on El Camino Real, observed some of the interaction between the sheriff deputies and Reinhold. He stated the officers were trying to be nice, and the man, Reinhold, pulled away, then hit and pushed the deputy. John Doe number 2, a Marine from Camp Pendleton, was also on the north side of El Camino Real, directly across from the Miramar Hotel, observed the interaction between the deputies and Reinhold. John Doe number 2 heard the deputies tell Reinhold to stop approximately 5 times. He heard Reinhold respond, "Get off me, I did nothing wrong." John Doe number 2 indicated at this point the deputies were not physically on top of Reinhold. John Doe number 2 observed Reinhold walking illegally and in the middle of the street. After traveling approximately 300 yards, Deputy Israel and Deputy Duran were able to direct Reinhold back to the westbound sidewalk on El Camino Real, directly in front of the Miramar Hotel. Reinhold attempted to walk back into the street, however, Deputy Israel blocked his path, and Reinhold tried to shove him out of the way. It was at that moment Deputy Duran grabbed Reinhold by his backpack and took him to the ground. As Deputy Duran took Reinhold to the ground, As Deputy Duran took Reinhold to the ground, Reinhold grabbed and landed on top of Deputy Israel. The 3 men were on the grass area between the sidewalk and the street. Deputy Duran was on top of Reinhold's lower half. Deputy Israel's back was on the ground, and Reinhold's left shoulder was on top of his chest. While on the ground, Reinhold continued resisting by attempting to get up in violation of Penal Code Section 69, resisting arrest by force. While Reinhold was on top of him, and within seconds, Deputy Israel felt his gun being pulled and then heard the rattling of his gun in its holster. Service weapon was on the right side of his body. Deputy Israel released his right hand from his grip on Reinhold and then attempted to secure his gun. It was at this point he felt Reinhold's left hand on the grip of his pistol and was pulling it. Deputy Israel immediately shouted to Deputy Duran, "He's got my gun." Deputy Israel yelled this to Deputy Duran a few times. Then both deputies heard Reinhold say, "I'm going to get it." While Deputy Duran was holding on to Reinhold's legs, he heard Deputy Israel frantically scream, "He's got my gun," at least 3 times. Upon hearing this, Deputy Duran, fearing for the life of his partner and himself, Deputy Duran took out his gun and pressed it into ribs of Reinhold. 2 separate times, Deputy Duran told Reinhold, "Drop it or I'll shoot." Reinhold continued to resist. Deputy Israel was still screaming, "He's got my gun." Deputy Duran then took his gun and angled it so it would not hit himself or his partner and fired. After firing the first shot, Deputy Duran felt Reinhold continuing to resist and heard Deputy Israel say, "He's still got my gun. Shoot him again." Upon feeling Reinhold continuing to resist and hearing his partner, Deputy Duran shot a second round into the upper portion of Reinhold's chest. After this, Reinhold's body went limp. Deputy Israel immediately put on the radio "Shots fired." Deputy Duran then rolled Reinhold onto his back, and Deputy Israel and Deputy Duran began chest compressions until paramedics arrived. Video surveillance from the Miramar Hotel captured the deputy's involvement right before taking Reinhold to the ground and the actually shooting of Reinhold by Deputy Duran. The video clearly showed Reinhold not only reaching for Deputy Israel's gun, but eventually grabbing a hold of Deputy Israel's gun. Evidence collected. The following items were collected. A sample of Reinhold's post-mortem blood was collected for toxicology and DNA testing. The blood was examined for the presence of drugs and alcohol. No alcohol or illicit drugs were detected. Deputy Duran's firearm, a Glock 17 Gen 5 9mm automatic pistol, serial number BMB. Deputy Israel's firearm, Sig Sauer model P226 9mm semi-automatic pistol, serial number 47A201063. The 2 cartridge cases from the scene, and swabs from Deputy Jonathan Israel. Firearms examination. The firearm of Deputy Duran, a Glock 17 Gen 5 9mm, was examined by the crime lab. The Glock pistol was test fired and operated without malfunction. The 2 cartridge cases from the scene were both fired from Duran's Glock pistol. The 2 bullets recovered at the autopsy were both determined to have been fired from Duran's Glock pistol. Evidence examination and DNA typing. Deputy Israel Sig Sauer pistol with 1 cartridge from chamber, magazine with 20 cartridges and 3 fully loaded backup magazines. Swabs from Deputy Israel, swabs for DNA from scene, pistol grip and holster, knife handle and holder, and backing of plastic holster. Swabs from hands of Kurt Reinhold, bloodstain standard from Kurt Reinhold. DNA analysis. The crime lab is an accredited forensic crime lab. DNA examination and analysis revealed that Kurt Reinhold was the major contributor to the DNA mixture obtained from Deputy Israel's pistol hand grip and holster sample. Examination and analysis revealed that Kurt Reinhold is the major contributor to the DNA mixture obtained from Deputy Israel's knife and holster sample. Additional DNA testing, along with a DNA analysis conducted by the Sheriff's Crime Lab, additional DNA testing was conducted in this case by a second crime lab. Bode Technology is an accredited forensic crime lab. DNA extract remaining from the examination of the pistol grip and holster swab was sent to Bode Technology for analysis. Bode also concluded that Reinhold was the major contributor to the DNA mixture obtained from the DNA extract of Deputy Israel's pistol grips. Toxicology analysis. Reinhold's post-mortem blood was examined for the presence of drugs and alcohol. None were detected. Autopsy. On September 26, 2020, Dr. Scott Luzzi conducted a forensic autopsy on Reinhold. Dr. Luzzi confirmed that Reinhold had sustained 2 gunshot wounds to the right upper torso. 1 bullet was recovered from the soft tissues of the left side of the chest. A second bullet was recovered from the third thoracic vertebrae. The cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds. Criminal history of Reinhold. Since 2019, Reinhold has had several encounters and arrests by law enforcement. October 2019, in Culver City, Reinhold was reported to be on a homeowner's front porch. When the owner was on the phone with 911 to report the trespass, Reinhold was heard trying to open the front door. In January of 2020, Reinhold was arrested for trespassing by the San Francisco Airport Police Department. Airport employees observed Reinhold open an emergency exit door. When told by airport personnel to stay here, Reinhold ignored their request and opened another emergency exit. In March 2020, Reinhold was arrested for PC 148A while being questioned by the Butte Police Department officers surrounding a trespass and an attempt car burglary investigation. During the questioning by police, Reinhold refused to follow police commands and then physically resisted the police. While on the ground, Reinhold attempted to force his way up and repeatedly tucked his arms underneath his body. In August of 2020, Reinhold was arrested for PC 148 during an assault and battery investigation in the city of Irvine. The victim claimed that Reinhold approached him in the street, asked if he was a Christian, and then proceeded to punch and kick him. When Irvine police attempted to ask Reinhold questions, he refused to follow commands, and additional officers were needed to take Reinhold to the ground. While on the ground, Reinhold refused to allow the police to handcuff him by keeping his hands underneath his body. The case was submitted to the Orange County District Attorney's Office and filed on September 28, 2020. The complaint alleged charges of PC 240 assault and PC 242 battery and PC 148A resisting arrest. Standard legal principles in officer-involved shooting cases. Possible criminal charges against an officer involved in an on-duty shooting incident include murder, Penal Code Section 187, manslaughter, Penal Code 192, assault with a deadly weapon, Penal Code Section 245, and assault by a police officer, Penal Code 149. In order to convict an officer of any of these charges, however, it would be necessary to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that no legal justifications existed for the officer's action. People v. Adrian, 1982. Several such justifications may apply in any given case and are set forth in Penal Code Sections 196, 197, and 835A. California Penal Code Section 196 provides that the use of deadly force by a public officer is justifiable when necessarily used in arresting persons who are charged with a felony and who are fleeing from justice or resisting such arrest. Section 196 applies both where the suspect in question is charged with a felony and where the officer has reasonable cause to believe that the person has committed a felony. Cordum v. Alkire, 1977. The felony must involve violence or the threat of violence. California Penal Code 197 provides that the use of deadly force by any person is justifiable when used in self-defense or defense of others. California Penal Code 835A allows any police officer who has reasonable cause to believe that a person to be arrested has committed a felony to use reasonable force to effect the arrest, to prevent escape, or to overcome resistance. The section further provides that a police officer who makes or attempts to make an arrest need not retreat or desist from his efforts by reason of the resistance or threatened resistance of the person being arrested. Nor shall such officer be deemed an aggressor or lose his right to self-defense by the use of reasonable force to effect the arrest or to prevent escape or to overcome resistance. The Court of Appeal in Cordum further held that deadly force against a fleeing felony suspect is justifiable only when the felony is of the violent variety, forcible and atrocious one, which threatens death or serious bodily harm, or there are other circumstances which reasonably create a fear of death or serious bodily harm to the officer or another. Whew, that's a lot. In addition, Penal Code Section 834A requires that if a person has knowledge or by the exercise of reasonable care should have knowledge that he is being arrested by a peace officer, that person must refrain from using force or any weapon to resist such force. Similarly, the relevant criminal jury instruction is written by the Judicial Council of California and set forth by CalCrim 3470 permits a person being assaulted to defend himself from attack as a reasonable person. He had grounds for believing he did believe that bodily injury was about to be inflicted upon him or upon another person. In doing so, such person may immediately use all force and means which he believes to be reasonably necessary, which would appear to a reasonable person in the same similar circumstances to be necessary to defend against the danger and to prevent the injury which appears to be imminent. Alright. I'm going to skip some of this stuff because it's long-winded shit. Legal analysis. The issue of this case is whether the conduct of Deputy Duran on September 23, 2020 was criminally culpable and without justification. As stated above, in order to charge Deputy Duran with a criminal violation, it is required that the prosecution have the good faith belief in the ability to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that no legal justification existed for the police officer's conduct. If Deputy Duran's actions were justifiable as lawful self-defense or defense of others, criminal charges will not be warranted. Based on the totality of the available evidence, it is clear that Deputy Duran was justified in believing Reinhold posed a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to his partner, himself, and the surrounding civilians. The contact that the deputies made with Reinhold was justified because he had violated a vehicle code section crossing against a red light. This violation allowed the deputies to initiate contact with Reinhold. The fact that Deputy Israel indicated to Reinhold he was being stopped for jaywalking does not negate the deputy's lawful authority to stop Reinhold for his violation of walking against a red hand for pedestrian traffic. Technically, Reinhold was correct that he did not violate VC 21955 jaywalking. However, Reinhold was not free to leave because he had violated Vehicle Code Section 21456C, walking against a red hand for pedestrian traffic. Deputy Israel was within legal authority to detain Reinhold. The California Supreme Court in People v. Silveria and Travis states, to determine whether an officer has probable cause to arrest an individual, a court examines the events leading up to the arrest and then decides whether these historical facts, viewed from the standpoint of an objectively reasonable police officer, amount to probable cause. An arrest remains lawful under the Fourth Amendment, U.S. Constitution, Fourth Amendment, when the criminal offense for which there is probable cause to arrest is different from the offense stated by the arresting officer at the time of arrest. Reinhold further committed multiple violations after failing to comply with deputies' legal detention of him. These additional violations included resisting arrest, pedestrian upon a roadway other than a marked crosswalk, battery on a peace officer, obstructing a police officer in the performance of their duties with force. It is important to note that both Deputy Israel and Duran were in their clearly identifiable sheriff's uniforms and exited from their clearly marked black and white Orange County Sheriff's Department vehicle as it relates to the violations of PC 148A, PC 243B, and PC 69. When contacted about vehicle code violation, Reinhold refused to follow directions and walked away from the deputies after being requested to stop multiple times. Deputy Israel, who was legally justified in stopping Reinhold, made numerous unsuccessful attempts to obtain compliance. Civilian witnesses observed these attempts by law enforcement and further stated Reinhold's non-compliance. Not only did Reinhold walk away from the deputies in legal performance of their duties, but Reinhold put other motorists and the deputies in danger while he walked in the middle of a busy street. After a few minutes, deputies were eventually able to get Reinhold out of the street and back onto the sidewalk. It was only when Reinhold attempted to go back towards the street and through Deputy Israel was when Deputy Duran attempted to gain control of Reinhold. When Israel and Duran attempted to arrest Reinhold, he physically resisted. While on the ground, Reinhold continued to struggle. Both deputies described Reinhold as having a muscular build. Deputy Israel, as he was on top of Reinhold, initially felt his gun move and then felt Reinhold grabbing for his gun. Video surveillance from the Miramar Hotel clearly shows Reinhold was grabbing for Deputy Israel's weapon and then eventually pulling on the gun grip of Deputy Israel's service pistol. DNA analysis on Deputy Israel's pistol established Reinhold's DNA was located on the grip of the pistol. Deputy Israel was justifiably and reasonably afraid Reinhold would get his gun and either shoot himself, his partner, or any of the numerous civilians in the air, so he yelled to Deputy Duran, "He's got my gun." Upon hearing the frantic screams of his partner, Deputy Duran removed his service weapon and placed it against the chest of Reinhold. The sole purpose of Deputy Duran removing his service weapon was for the protection of Deputy Israel himself and the community. Prior to the firing of any shots, Deputy Duran yelled at Reinhold, "Drop it or I'll shoot, drop it or I'll shoot." When Reinhold continued to fight with the deputies, and upon hearing Deputy Israel again tell Deputy Duran, "He's got my gun," Deputy Duran fired a first shot into Reinhold's chest. After this first shot, Deputy Duran felt Reinhold continue to resist and fight. Deputy Israel, after the first shot, still felt Reinhold resist and continue his attempts at getting the gun. Deputy Israel yelled at Deputy Duran, "He still got my gun," shooting him again. Deputy Duran then shot a second round into the chest of Reinhold. Despite their life-saving efforts, the second shot ended his life. Both deputies gave voluntary statements during the course of the investigation. Their statements are corroborated by not only the surveillance video, statements of civilian witnesses, but also by the forensic evidence analyzed. Both deputies believed deadly force was needed in the situation to protect their lives and that of any civilians in that location. Conclusion. Based upon a review of all evidence provided and obtained by the Orange County District Attorney's Office, and based upon the entirety of the facts contained in all available reports and interviews reviewed, and pursuant to applicable legal principles, it is our legal opinion that there is no evidence of criminal culpability in the part of Deputy Eduardo Duran, and there is substantial evidence that his actions were reasonable and justified under the circumstances when he shot and killed Reinhold on September 23, 2020. Accordingly, the OCDA is closing this inquiry into the incident. All right, so that was really long. That was 10 pages, and I skipped a lot of stuff. So, when this is like my third or fourth take on this video, and the first couple takes, of course, whenever you're doing videos, you say stupid stuff, and then, you scrap it. But the first couple times I didn't have this document, and the first couple takes I was doing, I had, I guess, some more questions in my head about what was going on, and I didn't want to just put a video out there without knowing a whole lot of facts. And unfortunately, with a lot of these cases, these videos that end up being released, a lot of times it's in the early stages of the investigation. There's not a whole lot of information out there, but this happened back in 2020. And it's now at the conclusion of it. So there is a lot of information out there, and I found that. But one of the things I had mentioned in my earlier outtakes of this was the fact that this guy kept accumulating criminal offenses, the resisting and the walking out in the middle of the street, etc. And I just found it, interesting that when I read through that 10-page thing, that it kind of followed in line with a lot of what I had been talking about in the earlier videos. So based off this guy's prior history, he's been involved a lot. And the family's attorney says that these were convictionless incidents. So it sounds like they're saying, although he was arrested for these things, he was never convicted of anything. I don't know how true that is. I wouldn't doubt it, based off the fact that, he could be homeless, and the little things, of him trespassing. Maybe, people just aren't, wanting to waste court resources on a little simple trespass and decide to give him, a diversion or something like that. Wouldn't doubt it. Especially, somewhere like California, where you have a lot more liberal-minded people who just don't believe in prosecuting criminals. So it would not surprise me one bit that out of all those arrests, he never got true convictions. And it's also possible that because some of them were so close to this incident that although technically there's no convictions in them, it's also obvious that it hasn't been long enough for it to go through the court system. So he could have had pending court dates for some of those arrests, and he just hadn't showed up to court yet. And or that they were scheduled, after this incident. And obviously, he's never going to show up to him anymore. But, if that's the case, if he was arrested in, I forget what the dates were, but if he was arrested, a few months before this incident, there aren't any court cases that happen that quick. I mean, some, you may get plea deals or something like that pretty soon, but it could be that, he was arrested a couple months before this incident and he had a court date a month after this incident. Yeah, sure. Technically, that means he wasn't convicted of anything, but it was also, a pending case. So, but anyway, the ones, that he would have had time to be fully processed through the court system, like I said, it would not surprise me if they did some type of diversion or something like that, and nothing came of it. The interactions that he had the night before with the officers, where he practically got to act an asshole towards them and they didn't really have anything to go on and left him alone. Interactions like that, those prior interactions that he went through and nothing major happened, he didn't stay in jail for a very long time, no real consequences, that shit builds up. And it builds up in a way that a person starts to not fear the criminal justice system. They start not fearing the police. When that starts to happen, people get bold. They feel like they can do whatever they want because there's no real consequences. And we are seeing this all across the nation right now with violent crimes. You go to some places in the U.S., it is a different world. And here in Kentucky, I'll use Louisville, for example. Louisville is off the fucking chain. Like, there are murders and shootings, like, just, it's insane, the rate of shootings and murders that's going on up there. And that's because, one, a lot of them are juveniles. And the juvenile system here in Kentucky is a flat-out fucking joke. they have no real consequences of what's going on. Even the adults, when the adults get picked up for stuff in Louisville, there's really no real consequences. There was an incident within the last month where a guy who actually worked for a newspaper up there, the Courier Journal, went to the office of another person who's running for mayor and tried to kill him, shot at him. One of the bullets went through the person's clothing, didn't hit his body, but went through his clothing. He fired multiple shots at him, trying to kill him, and they released him out on bond within a few days after that. And of course, you know, the big buzzword is mental illness. He's mentally ill. Blah, 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 blah. There's mental illness going on. Boo-hoo. Shit's crazy right now. It really is. When you look at a lot of your street murders and stuff like that, these things are being perpetrated by violent offenders who are out on probation or parole or have had multiple arrests, multiple felony arrests. And if the courts would follow the law and punish these miscreants to the fullest extent, those people never would have been out to be able to commit crimes. The ones who've had multiple felony convictions and are persistent felony offenders who should be locked up and sentenced for 10 years but instead released within a couple years and put on probation, if those people would have been kept in for 10 years, those would be the types who don't go out and commit murders. Although this guy here, Reinhold, hasn't gone out and committed murder or at least been arrested for murders and stuff like that, he has still, in the same sense, enjoyed the idiotic liberal policies that are plaguing the criminal justice system. He has suffered no real consequences for his actions, and it shows. If there had been some real consequences for his actions, he would have never acted like this towards them. And the way he's acting towards them tells me that he has done this before with some degree of success. He doesn't fear them because he knows that he can do whatever he wants, and if they take him to jail, he's going to get right back out and go back to doing what he wants to do. He may get a sweet plea deal and not have to do the max amount of time. He'll do a short amount of time, whatever. He knows there's no consequences, and so he's acting this way. And I would not be surprised to find out that, he acted this way as a kid, throwing little temper tantrums like this and acting like this to get what he wants. And then progressing like that all the way through, his school and going into adulthood, in the workforce and stuff like that. Normal people with normal upbringings, respectable normal people, they don't act like this. They don't act like this at all. And they certainly don't act like this towards the police. So it's really no surprise to me, like I said, that he's acting like this because the criminal justice system has failed miserably. And not just in this case, but many cases over all across this nation. They talked about de-escalation training that these officers took with Anaheim police, and what you see them doing is de-escalation. Now, the moment he touched him, Reinhold swatted that deputy's hand away, and this is not the first time he does it. The moment he does that, it should have been game on at that point. There is no more verbal de-escalation at this point. The minute you assault a peace officer, it should be fucking game on. Like that is a hard physical no. You don't put your hands on the police. And that mindset should have been in those officers' head. You don't put your fucking hands on us. The minute you put your hands on an officer, your ass needs to be on the ground. So that right there is a big failing point to me. The de-escalation stuff. So I believe that people's perceptions of de-escalation and what their thoughts are of it and their expectations are totally unrealistic. Am I saying that there should be no attempts whatsoever for de-escalation? No, I'm not saying that at all. Verbal de-escalation. If you can verbally de-escalate a person, great. That's wonderful. We don't have to get some scraped knees and hurt backs or bloody noses, right? I mean, for the younger guys, you can roll on the ground and get back up and brush it off and keep going like nothing happened. Hey, that's all for them. But, you know, shit, I'm getting older, and it kind of hurts after a while being on the ground with someone. So verbal de-escalation is great if it works, but it doesn't always work. It's like a taser. It may work sometimes it don't. And when people teach these de-escalation classes, and when you look at some training curriculum for these classes, it almost always revolves around the concept of just talking, and that's it. It doesn't really go into using physical force. And I think that is a failing point right there, because you can't just always talk it out with people. All right, this is not like the movie Negotiator with Kevin Spacey and Samuel L. Jackson. You're not going to talk shit out with people. It just don't work that way. And this is an example of where talking is going nowhere, especially when the recipient here doesn't even fully respect or fear that the people that they're talking to, because they know that nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to come of it. They might go spend a few hours in jail, maybe a couple of nights, and then they're going to be right back out on the street doing whatever the hell they want. There's been other videos where I've talked about this before, where just the continuous talking does nothing. And in my opinion, too much talking can actually have the unintended consequence of causing the situation to escalate even further into the level that you don't want it to go. And when it does start to escalate, the subject is the one who gets to initiate that escalation, and then the officers are the ones who are having to react to that escalation. And when it comes to action versus reaction, the ones who are on the reaction side are on the shit end of the stick, so to speak. It always sucks to have to be on the reaction end. I mean, when you think about a person pulling a gun on you, you're now having to react to that. You're now behind the curve. There's a slower response for you, or time for you, because they've already initiated action. So it's always better when you get to initiate action, because then they have to react to what you're doing. So too much talking, in my opinion, can be disastrous and have the unintended consequence of leading to escalation. There has to come a point where you recognize the fact that talking is not getting you anywhere. You have to recognize the fact that you're too calm and non-authoritative looking demeanor, where you're not trying to escalate anything, you're not raising your voice or anything like that. That right there makes you look weak. And when you're dealing with an aggressive person, if you have the appearance of weak, well, they're going to take that and run, because they now think they own you. They now think they run this situation. They control it. They think that they are alpha. So sometimes the actions that you take during de-escalation can be detrimental with certain people. This whole time, this guy is raising his voice and yelling, but you never hear the officers raise their voice very much at all.
From that place, liquor store right there. Bring her a table. Stop touching. Stop touching. Stop touching. I need it. Why are you stopping? What is it doing, bro? Stop touching. Stop touching. Stop touching, bro. What is your problem? Why are you touching me? Why are you touching me? Why are you touching me? For what? Who are you? Really? Stop touching.
So you can very clearly hear what he's talking about. You can barely hear these deputies. You can make out some things they're saying, but for the most part, you can't make out a whole lot of what they're saying. This guy, pretty much every damn word you can hear what he's saying. This guy is the more alpha in this scenario. I hate to say that, but that is what it is. This guy is more alpha than these two deputies is right now. From an outsider looking in, one could even say that these cops appear to be bitches because they're not taking control of this situation. They're not exerting their dominance in this. And this is why this guy, partly why this guy is acting the way he's acting. One, his prior experience with being detained and arrested and going through this process has not resulted in him having to be locked up for an extended period of time, or his interactions with law enforcement, him acting a dick and them going away and nothing ever happening, has just emboldened him to this point. And in this particular scenario, where he is acting alpha, he's yelling at them, he's peacocking, right? Like he's posturing. He's yelling. He's raising both his arms and hands to these officers. He aggressively moves towards the officer, and then the officer gives his ground up and backs away from him. This guy is on a power trip at this point. And these officers, they've lost control of this guy. The fact that they walked 300 yards from their fucking patrol car, like what the hell? Like why was this guy allowed to even make it 300 yards away from when they first made contact with him? That is absurd. That is an extremely long distance. This is where de-escalation has miserably failed. And this is where the training for de-escalation miserably fails. Because it doesn't include when you switch off the talking and go to physical. When the talking fails, it's going to have to turn physical. And they eventually come to this conclusion, obviously, because they start to take him down. But it should have happened long before this. Long before this. And the family talking about why the officer had his taser out. It's very obvious why the officer had his taser out. This guy is acting aggressive and hostile. He looks like he's about to fight at any moment. Him swatting the officer's hand away from him. Him advancing towards the officer, raising both hands and arms. Acting the way he is. Personally, after that first swipe at him, the officer with the taser should have deployed taser on this guy. That should have, like I said, that is the line in the sand. The minute you put your hand on an officer, it is fucking game on. That should be the precedence everywhere. Everywhere, that should be the expected norm. You do something to an officer. You put your hands on them. Even if you swat their arm away, it should be game on. Your ass is being taken down hard, put in cuffs, and go in the jail. No fucking questions about it. But unfortunately, because some agencies have a bunch of pussy-ass administrators in them, and they'll write officers up for using force, they'll discipline officers for using force. Some officers in some places are a little bit intimidated when it comes to using force because they don't want to get in trouble. They think that the administration, some of which who have not been on the street for years or have not worked the floor for years and just don't understand shit, they fear that they're going to get some type of bullshit consequence out of it. Or in this case, I think that they were probably improperly trained with the de-escalation stuff. It probably, in my opinion, most likely revolved all around talking only and didn't include any hands-on, getting physical kind of stuff. So as I said, the minute he hit that officer, it should have been game on. Unfortunately, it wasn't, and this happened a couple more times. The fact that he made it 300 yards away from the stop point, that's a problem. They should have ended it at the 100-yard mark. I mean, once you start getting that 100-yard mark away from where you initially stopped at, and the person's still walking away, resisting, arrest at that point, not refusing to stop, I mean, that's too far away. That should have been a sign. Like, hey, like, that car is really far looking away. Like, it's getting smaller. Like, that should have been a sign. So you can see that he has his taser out. It's right there. And he only has it down inside. So he's not holding it up in a aiming fashion, which I guess, for de-escalation purposes, it's not, in a threatening manner. Can't offend people anymore.
The man is refusing to obey to detain him.
So you'll see him eventually start to put that taser back into his vest. So, although they do make the attempt to go take him down, I do think that the curb had an assisting hand in this. Now you notice he's got his leg pinned right here. I like that. That's a good move. When you pin leg or legs like that, that makes it hard for them to gain traction and move around. I don't know what the name of the move is, but while a person's in a prone position like this, having both their legs drawn up and ankles crossed, I've seen it where officer be to the rear of the feet like that with both legs up and bent back in this same fashion, and then just basically press their heels to their ass. Again, I can't remember the name of that move, but that is an effective technique. If you can get both those legs drawn up like that, or maybe even one, but both, if you get both legs just like this, and the officer can put their body weight on it and put heels to ass, that person's not going anywhere. They can't get any traction. Now, obviously, if they're just by themselves, that doesn't work because that person can wiggle. But if you have a person on the top side, try and control the upper torso and preventing them from rotating, that's an effective immobilization technique, and they're not going anywhere. Even with his one leg right there, this guy's pretty well immobilized, especially with the other officer up to the front there, pinning his upper torso down and preventing him from being able to rotate his body left or right. And when we see this officer let go of this leg from the hotel camera angle, you'll see that immediately after letting go of this leg, this guy is able and taking pressure off the other one. So simultaneously taking pressure off this leg and taking control off of this leg off. Almost simultaneously, this guy is able to dig his feet into the ground and then start rotating around like he's going to shrimp out of this and changes his positioning entirely. So getting control over someone once they're on the ground is super important, and being able to keep them from wiggling their little ass out. I've had people before, you get them down, they're in a prone position, but because, you don't have a good hold on them or whatever, boom, they're able to like twist and wiggle, and then you had them on their stomach, now they're on their back, and now they're able to start swinging at you more easily.
During the use of force, one deputy is heard on the witness cell phone video saying, "He's got my gun," multiple times. Shortly after, the deputy-involved shooting occurs.
All right, so looking at his legs right there, right? He's got that one leg bent up. He lets go of it. Then, boom, this guy is able to just quickly move and get into a different position here, and is basically has gotten himself on top of the officer. So initially he's on his belly at this point, one leg drawn up behind him and being pinned. As soon as he lets go, bam! Now he's on top of the officer. I mean, that was quick. I mean, that was super quick and fast. It talked in the report that the deputy here, he had to purposely angle his gun in a way that the trajectory would mean that it wouldn't potentially hit his partner or injure his officer in any way. Knowing your target and what's behind it. So that's an important thing. Bullets can sometimes go through a person. And in the autopsy report, it says that, he fired into his right side. One bullet was found into the left soft tissue of this guy. So it sounded like he fired from the right, and that bullet went all the way through his chest and landed in the left side area of his chest. I would suspect that a rib probably stopped it from fully exiting, or it's possible that all the material that it had to go through slowed it down enough where it didn't have enough force to exit. But the fact, obviously, bullets are unpredictable. You can't always predict what they're going to do. But it seems like it followed a pretty flat trajectory, I guess you could say, where, it went from point A to point B and it didn't make any curves along the way. If that bullet had enough oomph behind it, it's conceivable that it could have been a through and through. Now, obviously, hollow points help mitigate that. But, what if this suspect was smaller? What if he was a lot thinner? That's a real possibility. A bullet going all the way through the target and coming out the other side. And when you have a partner within bad breath distance of someone, they're entangled with each other, that's a real possibility that you have to think about. If you fire into this person, the bullet could go all the way through them and hit your partner. I've had a scenario kind of similar to that before. I had it was a few years back. Partner was dealing with a guy who was drunk. He'd been kicked out of a bar, and the guy actually had like a bottle of vodka on him or something like that, and the partner had taken that away from him, and the guy was just super drunk and belligerent and aggressive and hostile. And as I'm coming closer, they're outside in front of this bar area, and as I'm coming closer, I see the guy swing on my partner, and they both lock up and end up on the ground. Well, my partner ends up on his butt, basically, in a seated position, and the bad guy is behind him, and he's kind of sort of fallen too. and has gotten to his rear, and he's behind him. And so almost like two people riding a bicycle in a way. Like, think of that. Two people riding a bicycle or a motorcycle, and, you know, the bad guy is riding bitch at this point. And so he's behind my partner, and I can see his, as I'm approaching from their left rear. And as I'm approaching, I can see his right hand and arm moving around to my partner's right side. And he's a right-handed guy, so that's where his gun at. And the motion that he's doing, it looks like he's trying to grab his gun and tug on it. And as I'm approaching, that's what I'm seeing, and that's what I'm perceiving. And it's an active resistance. You know, they're going at it. And so I'm thinking, this guy's going for his gun. And I remember thinking, as I reached down to my gun and pushed the hood forward and was disengaging the lock, I remember thinking, if I shoot this guy, and he was kind of a smaller looking dude, if I shoot this guy and my round goes all the way through him, it could hit my partner. And it was like a split second, you know, thought process. As I'm approaching, ready to disengage my gun, it just flashes in my head. If I shoot this dude, it could go through all the way and hit my partner. So obviously, I don't pull the gun out and shoot, but instead I decide to go ahead and just fucking power punch this dude in the head. Funny story about that too is his head's turned, so I go to punch him I thought I would punch him in the side of the head, drill him hard enough to make him go to sleep. Well, I throw that punch and his head twitches, and the back of his head is what I end up hitting, and instantaneously broke my third metatarsal. And as soon as I hit him, I was like, shh, I felt it. I was like, fuck. So I can't hit him again. I don't know what happened, but that hurt. And, of course, they're still fighting. And so I grabbed the dude by his neck, chin kind of area with both hands. I just wrapped both mitts around his neck and chin area. And I just lift up, and I toss that little fucker backwards. And I lifted him up, and he goes flying backwards a couple feet. He slides across the concrete, and he's starting to get back up. And so I just remember reaching down to my OC, pulling it out, and I just painted his face. Like, probably a good 4-second burst or more. It was longer than your typical burst, a second burst, right? Like, I just fucking hosed him down. Well, he was done at that point. He didn't want any more fight. And put that away, and then this all occurred within seconds. And put that away, and it wasn't 30 seconds after that, my hand was completely done and out of the fight. And I couldn't grip anything, do anything with it. So, fun little war story. But yeah, knowing your target and what is behind it. So in close entanglements like this, that's something you have to be very aware of. And also other, obviously, deadly physical force scenarios. You got to know your target and what's behind it. And, we talk about this in firearms training. Any firearms training class you go to, you should hear the four cardinal rules. But in some ways, I think that's slightly lost in some ways on a 2A range, on some cases, unless you're doing more kind of dynamic training. So if you're just on a flat range, you got paper targets, on the line, and you're several feet back and you're all on the line, that's all you're doing, I think that stuff can cause you to lose grasp of the fourth cardinal rule of knowing your target and what's behind it, because you're always shooting at a dirt berm. When you start interjecting more dynamics into it. You start moving around on the range. You have multiple targets on the range. You have shoot, no shoot targets. I think that helps with the training the brain into recognizing, shoot, no shoot targets, knowing your angles and stuff, especially if you have an area where an officer or a shooter has to shoot from, and the target's here, but almost right behind it is a no-shoot target. That then obviously makes the person have to calculate where they're at, the target's at, and the no-shoot target's at, and they'll have to move to make a better firing solution. And then force on force. Multiple people involved in the scenario, and, if you have a non-combatant, a no-shoot person, walk up at the end of the evolution and they got marking cartridges on them, that's a good learning moment right there. That's a good thing for that student to be able to look at and be like, shit, I shot someone who didn't need to be shot. So although the know your target and what's behind it is always mentioned in firearms training, sometimes I just don't think it's always prevalent unless you start doing more advanced training, and then it comes a little bit more prevalent. Let's see here. All right, so medical stuff. So they start rendering medical aid to this guy. They start doing CPR. Now, that's the extent of what we get to see. I don't know if they end up using any other medical gear, if they had any medical gear or whatnot. I have no idea. But let's talk about medical stuff. And let's talk about the fact that they're 300 yards away from their cruiser. So, if you're the type of person who believes or has the mindset that you're going to keep all your medical gear in your car because if you need it, it'll be in your car and you can grab it, that's the wrong mindset to have. These guys were 300 yards away from their car. What if this guy had a gun and he pulled it and started shooting? Or let's say he even got the officer's gun out and was able to start shooting, and one of these officers took a hit to the femoral artery and they didn't have any medical gear on them. Their tourniquet and stuff was in the car. That officer is going to have to do a 300-yard sprint to that cruiser. Get in that cruiser, haul ass back while trying to go through some of this traffic here to get to the downed officer to apply a tourniquet. You can bleed to death in 90 seconds from a femoral artery hit. That right there should be a wake-up call to anyone and everyone who carries medical gear in their car and just leaves it in the car with the mindset of, well, if I need it, it's in the car. You should never have that mindset. If you're the type that has that mindset, you need to change what you're doing. There's no guarantee that you're going to be able to get to your car. You could be 300 yards away from it. You could be a mile away from it. You could be pinned down by gunfire and unable to get to it. Your car could be set on fire and be burning, and all the medical stuff in it is fucking melting. Someone could steal your car. Unfortunately, that happens a lot in law enforcement. Police cars getting stolen. Multiple different scenarios in which the medical gear in your car now becomes inaccessible or inoperable. So you have to carry that medical gear on you. And this is what I call first line medical gear. At a bare minimum, it could be just a tourniquet. And if that's all you carry, then great. You're doing better than a lot of people. Some agencies are able to provide this stuff to their officers. Some companies are able to provide this to their officers. If that's the case, that's great. I love it. But unfortunately, a lot of agencies, a lot of companies are just a little too poor to be able to afford that kind of stuff. Now, when it comes to police agencies, typically the employment retention is a little bit better. And so They could be more comfortable handing an officer a tourniquet because they know they're going to be there at least a couple of years, right? As far as security companies, that's a different. that's a lot different. Some security companies, they're not there very long. They're gone within a few months. And with that, also, there's no guarantee that you can get everything back. Some security companies have to eat the cost of someone quitting, and they don't return their uniform stuff. They don't return their shirts. They don't return their badge, whatever. And when it comes to tourniquets and stuff like that, if someone doesn't return that eats up cost. Excuse me. But police agencies, on the other hand, have a little bit more quality with employees, and usually a lot better employee retention rates. So they could more comfortably issue that stuff out and then not also have a concern about whether or not it's going to get back to them. But a lot of them are they don't have the budget for it. They can barely afford certain things, and when you start adding this other stuff, it's harder to get it. So some agencies can get this stuff under grants. Some agencies will actually budget for it. Some get donations. Local churches or other civic groups will raise money and give it to an agency, and the agency may be like, hey, we got enough money to buy tourniquets. Let's get all the patrol guys tourniquets. Great. A lot of places, the officers end up having to buy their own stuff, just like they have to end up buying their own stuff with other things. I don't think people realize this, but there are a lot of agencies out there where officers have to buy their own police equipment. There are people who have to buy their own duty belts, their own footwear, their boots and stuff. They have to buy their own bulletproof vests. There's some places where an officer has to buy their own gun. They have to furnish their own gun to be able to come to work. There's some places where officers basically have to take out small loans to purchase some of their equipment because the agency is so freaking poor that they can't afford to equip them. I actually have a friend of mine who started at a really small agency, and the agency wasn't able to provide a whole lot. They didn't even have a bullet-resistant vest to give to them, and they ended up having to borrow a vest from a mutual friend of ours who also owns his own security company. And the thought of a security company lending a bulletproof vest to a full-time police officer is actually kind of laughable. Like, what the fuck is wrong with this picture that a private security company is having to basically fund a full-time police officer because their agency can't afford to give them stuff? Like, that's crazy, right? But you would be surprised about how often that goes on. But anyway, so some agencies are able to provide tourniquets and stuff like that. Some can't. So if you're working for an agency or company that doesn't provide this stuff to you, I hate it. That sucks. That's a reality, though. But you should be going out and paying out of pocket for this stuff. This is life-saving equipment. You need this stuff. This is truly it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Just like your gun. Like, you would never think about going to work without your damn gun. You should also have that same mindset when it comes to medical gear. You shouldn't go to work unless you have medical stuff on you. Ambulance response times are slow. It can take 5 to 7 minutes for an ambulance to get on scene. If you're bleeding to death, you're 2-3 times dead before that damn ambulance gets on scene. So first line medical gear is what you need to have on you, and at bare minimum, all that can be is a tourniquet. If that's all you're going to carry, then do it. There's other stuff you can carry, and I would implore you to carry. But if the only damn thing you're going to carry is a tourniquet, then just carry that. At least you're a little bit more prepared than a lot of other people. The tourniquet, if you go with just a tourniquet, you can get a pouch that goes on the belt, and it takes up very little room, doesn't take up a whole lot of space at all. If you want to carry just that, or if you want to carry more stuff, there's also the option of a medical ankle holster. So if you wear an ankle holster for a gun on one leg, then you could very easily carry a medical ankle holster on the other leg, no problem whatsoever. And it's not very invasive, doesn't take up a whole lot of room, and doesn't really print at all. It's just like a regular ankle holster for a gun. If your uniform has cargo pockets, you could obviously stuff a med pouch down in a cargo pocket. If your agency or your company has outer vests that you can attach pouches to, and there's not any policies on what pouches are on there or anything like that, you can very easily put a med pouch on there and have actually quite a bit of medical gear on you. But at bare minimum, you can get a medical ankle holster and have a tourniquet, pressure dressing, occlusive dressing, compressed gauze, etc. to be able to treat a gunshot wound or a stab wound or a slash wound. That first line medical gear is vitally important because, like I said, you can't rely on an ambulance. It could be 5-7 minutes away, and if it's the scene of a shooting, we all know the ambulance is not going to pull right up to the middle of a scene of a shooting after it occurs. There's a reason why. There's a reason why the fire department and ambulance is called a second responder by some police, because they are not the first to respond to a shooting. They're the second to respond. And EMS, obviously, people who work in public safety know that at something like this, EMS is going to stage a distance away from the scene until they are told it is clear to proceed forward. So that can be a further delay, especially, if you're having to radio to your dispatch, hey, scene's clear. That dispatch then has to call the ambulance dispatcher, tell that dispatcher, and then their dispatcher radios to the ambulance and says, hey, PD says scene is clear, you can proceed. That's the time delay. On top of the response delay that's going to be factored in anyway. On average, it's about 5 to 7 minutes for an ambulance to get on scene. That's a lot of time to be waiting. A lot of time to be sitting there bleeding out waiting if you don't have any medical gear. So first line medical gear is something you should have on you. And I would also go so far as to say that your first line medical gear should be for you, your partner, or your loved ones. No one else. Unless you are 110% sure there is no more fighting to be had and the scene is legit secured with multiple officers on scene. And I'll say that again. Your first line medical gear should be used only for you, your partners, or your loved ones. No one else. Unless you're 110%, there's no more fighting to be had, and the scene is fully secure and there's multiple officers on scene. If those conditions are not met, you don't put your only tourniquet on the bad guy. If the bad guy has been shot and you or just your partner is there, you don't take your only life-saving equipment and put it on someone else, because you don't know if that someone else has a buddy or a family member within close proximity and will come up and see that you shot them and then start shooting at you. What if you took your only tourniquet and put it on a bad guy, and the bad guy's brother came around the corner, saw what's happened, and starts shooting at you, and then you get shot in the leg? Or your partner gets shot in the leg? What are you going to do? Take that tourniquet off that bad guy and put it on you? Put it on your partner? That's not realistic. They're just going to have to sit there and wait until more people get on scene and make that scene fully secured before you start putting your life-saving equipment on anyone else. Second line medical gear is the stuff that you keep in your car to supplement the gear that is carried on you, and or the second line gear can be used as standalone gear on other people. So you shoot bad guy and they've got a shot in the leg or their arm and they need a tourniquet. Well, if you have extra tourniquets in your second line gear, you go use your second line gear on them, because that's extra stuff to be able to use. That tourniquet that's on you stays on you. It don't go to anyone else. Getting the gear is one part. The knowledge on how to use it is the other part. So just like with guns, you just can't go buy a gun and carry it and put it into use. You got to know how to use it. You got to go train with it, and you got to practice with it. And the same is true for medical. You got to know how to use this stuff. And you got to have some degree of medical knowledge too. Anatomy. Sub-agencies and companies will have CPR, AED, first aid instructors. That's great, but realistically, those are not always the best people to be the ones teaching unless they have prior experience or a higher level of education than just CPR, AED, first aid instructor. Reason I say that is because almost anyone can become a CPR, AED, first aid instructor. Basically, all you have to do is just attend a 2-3 day class with no background in medical whatsoever. Literally, you could take someone who has worked for 10 years stocking shelves at Walmart, and they can decide one day they want to make extra money and go through a CPR, AED, first aid instructor class, or Walmart wants someone in-house to be able to do that, and this person got picked. They can literally go sit through a class and have no background in medical whatsoever. Like I said, they could spend the last 10 years stocking shelves. They go through this class, and so long as they pass it, boom, now they are able to go start teaching CPR, AED, first aid. That happens a lot. All across this nation, you have people teaching these classes who their only exposure to real medical knowledge came from taking that 2 to 3 day instructor class. That's it. And a lot of those people are slide readers, as I like to call them. They just read verbatim what's on the PowerPoint slide. They don't have the ability to expound upon any further information or anything like that. They just read word for word what's on that slide. That's not the person you want to train you on how to apply a tourniquet or chest seals or anything like that. Because one, they're not going to have any idea what the hell that shit is. Some of the curriculum for the first aid class may mention the use of a tourniquet, and there may be a video on how to use it. But when it comes to chest seals and packing wounds, stuff like that, they're going to be lost. They're not going to know what the hell to talk about. So it's better if you have someone with a higher level of medical training background and experience. You know, like someone who was in the military, was a combat lifesaver, someone who was an EMT or is a current EMT, etc. Those are the people you want doing a class on how to put tourniquets on and stuff like that. As far as, ambulance providers, different ambulance providers or hospitals may have like EMT classes. They may have EMT paramedic instructors who may be able to put on a specialized class for your agency on how to apply tourniquets. Air ambulance companies like doing that kind of stuff. They like putting on classes for like local fire departments and stuff like that. It helps build up their PR. It's better for their sales or whatever. That's a good avenue to approach right there. Or, the fire department too, depending on the area you're at. Some fire departments, they deal just fire only. They don't do any medical whatsoever. So if you obviously live in that area, you're kind of up creek without a paddle. But if your area has a fire department that doubles as EMTs, they go on medical calls, stuff like that, that may be a source on being able to link up with and see if one of their people can do a good class on how to apply tourniquets and stuff like that. The key is to get someone who's knowledgeable about this stuff and knows how to use it to teach your people how to do it. And once you've learned how to do it, then you can practice it on your own, doing in-service training and things like that. But you got to know how to do it. You got to get hands-on with it, just like you got to get hands-on with all your other equipment. that's about it. Yeah. So, if you like what you hear and see, go ahead and give me a like and a share. If you have not already, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more Monday quarterback videos. Earl Henderson, Primordial Defense, thank you for watching.